Then I introduce the next presentation that is by James Grogono. I'm very happy to meet him here. I have to tell a little story because it is the first time that I have the opportunity to meet him. And we exchanged some information about his own presentation over the weeks before. And I wrote him, I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to meet the father, the foiler's father. And he appreciated very much this way of calling him. But I have to say that when he was working on his Tornado and joking with foil, I probably had 1 or 2 years. So I think that the story of the foil, of the foiler, received a great contribution by James Grogono. So I think that he has a lot of information to share with us. If you like, I use the PC for you.
Oh, actually, I can. Okay. Oh, I say next slide, please. Okay. And that was so kind.
I do.
I'm so excited to be here. I can hardly believe it. And I want to thank Professor Andrea and Luca Rizzotti for asking me, and also Paul Larson, who mentioned my name. And you can imagine the phone conversation. You mean he's still alive? Yes. Is he confident and continent? And I wish I had come forward with a stick, because the story I'm talking about starts 60 years ago, and I mean exactly 60 years ago this week, in July the 9th, 1954, in a small laboratory, and I'm going to talk about that for a few moments as we go through the story of Icarus, which today is going to be all pictures, because a wonderful contrast with the talk just heard, which I was hanging on every word. But maybe tomorrow I go into theory, but today is going to be a picture story of Icarus. It is about the design, and that little subheading is, we had failures at every stage, and they were every sort of failure, design failures, structural failures, calculation failures. This was a wonderful way of learning by failure leading to success. And because no one got injured or damaged, and the costs were tiny, and we did it all, we made all these foils with our own hands, our own tools, all out of wood to start with. It was enjoyable and exciting, and of course at times it was pioneering. So before we go back 60 years, we'll just take a quick look at the end result. Next slide, please. Good old-fashioned 3-view. I'm sorry it doesn't come up well. There'll be better pictures, but a 3-view sent to me by a wonderful Frenchman, just showing even really poor on the screen, so I'm on the configuration side view and end on. You're all familiar with this, but this is the fully evolved version because the earlier ones were so different. And one more slide, please. That's a better picture. Now that is a record-breaking run, and you see the same configuration with this inverted T rear foil a long way out the back, and the front foils mounted on the crossbeam of a standard Tornado, and as you very kindly said, it was completely stable and a joy and effortless, and we got up to this fantastic speed of 28.4 knots after many tries and many years with the same equipment. That was 1979. Next one, please. And here is the interesting fact that for 35 years, Icarus has not changed. This was a recent outing in Speed Week where we still won the boat prize each day of Speed Week in Weymouth just a couple of years ago, because all the kites and boards were going much faster, and this was still the fastest boat. So it's very interesting that 35 years of not changing show that either this is a backwater sport, or else that we got it fairly satisfactory 35 years before. But 35 years is a very short time scale. I want to go back 25 years more. That's 60 years ago this week. Next slide, please. And there at the top, you see, a little wind tunnel. That's a propeller driving a little test platform, and there's a little airfoil. This is in air, not water, and I had these spring balances, and I could measure lift and drag. And I was an arrogant young scientist, you see. I was in fact still at school, but there was a little laboratory there, and I got this kit out, and I compared, if you look on the right, the symmetrical wing, asymmetrical wing, and sail plan, and I was measuring lift to drag ratio 60 years ago. It's amazing. And just look at the performance. of the asymmetrical wing with its lift-to-drag ratio of 7.5, symmetrical wing I go up to 4, and the sail plan not even reaching 2. So there was I, in this position of the fact that all we need to do is to make wings for sailboats. But I chose to go the other way and thought, what would happen if you put a hydrofoil underneath the sailboat? And so, completely on my own, I promise you I had no idea anyone had done it. I made my first design. Next one, please. And the first design was 5 years later. This is 1959, and this design, which was, of course, original out of my head, had the unusual feature of a nice little V-foil front and back, a two-rung ladder foil at the back, and there you see on the left, the hull has disappeared, because once you were foilboard, you had a wedge, and with the hull suspended under the crossbeams, you knocked out the wedge, and the hulls flashed out the middle, and you went off on your foils. Never built. Indeed, it wasn't built at all, because I wasn't willing to tell anyone. I was so certain that this was going to be successful and go faster than any other sailing boat had ever been. I kept this secret. I would not tell anyone, because someone might copy me. And I was an impecunious medical student, and then a very impecunious young hospital doctor training. And so I kept this secret until something terrible happened in 1967. Next slide, please. In 1967, next one, please, sorry.
Yes.
In 1967, Yachting World published the Tornado. Now, the Tornado had a higher power-to-weight ratio than any other yacht by a factor of more than 2 ever designed. It was wide. I'm sorry for the three. You know how wide a Tornado is. It was wide. It was light. It had this huge sail plan with an over-rotating mast. 1967. This was a genius design by an electron telephone engineer called Rodney March. And I couldn't at night. Here was someone who'd made the perfect foil platform. All I had to do was to make the foils. And I lost sleep. I couldn't go to, I lay awake, night all fretting. I couldn't concentrate. So I had to get hold of a Tornado, and I had no money. I found a school friend to help buy it. And we acquired the Tornado and made some foils. Next slide, please. So here we are, arriving down at the Tornado with a road trailer containing these foils. This one goes up through the hull, that's the rain foil, and the other ones screw onto the front. Next slide, please. But we turned up one day and screwed them onto the Tornado. This is the bow foil. This is a canard, you know, light-laden, controlling front foil, main foil at the back. We'll have a picture of that. This was not what we call the aeroplane configuration, but you can see the screw holes, and we fastened this on. I may say the Tornado had some little hardwood blocks put in to the places where the screws were going to go, because you know at the bottom of a Tornado there would be 2mm plywood. So there had a little bit of preparation had been put in with the builder to put in attachment points. And next slide, please. I'm sorry, this is a view of myself, very fuzzy, either praying to heaven or making it clear that this is all mine, but it shows the end-on view of the two foils. It shows the configuration with vertical struts and huge wooden foils, which we crafted out of our own, in my father's workshop. And they were far too large. Next slide, please. And transport to the water was impossible. This, in fact, most of the subsequent members of the original syndicate were there helping as friends then, steadying this thing on a high-level trolley, and then with heroics launching it into the water, with a lot of people getting wet who'd not intended to get wet, but it took 4 feet of depth before it would float. And this was September 1969. Next slide, please. It is in the water. There's the little lightweight strut there, the main foil underneath and the bow foil, you see. And making a point about canard, here is the centre of gravity carried on the main foil, just about on the centre of gravity, with the pitch pole force to count for. The pitch pole force frightened us, from saying, we worried about it perhaps too much, but it was obviously likely to be stable. Next slide, please. And there, I shouldn't make extravagant claim, but it was the in the UK, and of course it was absolutely the first foil height flight on a standard craft. But of course by this time we'd found, sadly, that Monitor had been there before, and Donald Nigg had been there before, and a delightful third American called Apollonio. And they're all three people I corresponded with, and I started writing magazine articles and books. It never stopped from then on. But the excitement was completely ridiculous. I can't tell you how slow it was. It wasn't just slower than a normal tornado, it was miles slower than an ordinary tornado. We were stupid enough to organise some speed trials, but it worked, and that was what was exciting. And so we had to get rid of these huge foils, we had to get rid of this impracticability, and the thing fell apart for the first, second, and third times with the chocks and foils breaking, and we went away and rebuilt the same winter. So 1970, next slide please. 1970, we have, do you mind if I point with my finger, or shall I use this? Can I use
the pointer, no.
Does it work? No. It's so, the front foil is the same configuration, much smaller foils, but now they are steering from the front, and we have a rear-facing rudder, a rear-facing tiller, and then the back foil is self-evident, is rotating on a beam fastened outside the hull. I'm sorry, I should have just, I talked to the slide.
The red button.
Thank you very much, and apologies. So here, you have a longitudinal beam outside the hull with these wooden inserts into the tornado's own beams, and this foil rotates around in a great circle and then latches onto the centerboard box. And this here was hung on pintles. We could do all this in deep water, so we'd go off with the boat's own rudders and centerboards. You can often see the rudders lying around on there, and the centerboards are pulled up, of course. And then you put the front foil down and put these rearward-facing tillers were quite satisfactory. The connection between the tillers would go from the back of the boat to the front, and during that transfer, you had 4 rudders, not one of them under human control, 2 at the back and 2 at the front, and so a certain amount of sea room was required if you weren't going to avoid disaster. But you see, it was stable, and it was practical, and the speed measurement was difficult, still defeated by a standard tornado, but in formal speed trials, 14, 15 knots, normal tornado 15, this thing 14. Next slide, please. There's just a little bit more detail of this strange ease of steering with a rearward-facing tiller, no difficulty at all, and this is perhaps we've almost covered it already, this main foil. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very important picture. I wanted to make sure no one else could play this game, so I made it look so difficult no one else was able to get on it. So you had to be out on a trapeze, standing out way over the side. You actually don't need to stand out at all. You could sit on board, as you'll see in a moment. But the troubles we had were endless, and here is the repair of a large hole made the previous day when the foil had failed to locate onto its little bracket there. Now, I must move a bit more quickly. I think I will, but you'll tell me when 20 minutes is finished. You'll tell me, because I will then
8 minutes. 8 minutes.
But we're going to move much quicker. We stopped doing it because there was no speed measurement. There was no point in doing this. And we went away and devised the speed trials, which is a separate topic. I'm sure you all know, 500 meters, no rules at all, very accurate measurement, and an outside observer verification. You can't do your own measurement. That's all speed sailing is, 500 meter course. I've got the category list of the records at the end, I'll show you this time. So we went away and managed to set up a speed sailing competition and get a sponsor, and that allowed us to justify going into metal. Next slide, please. So here we have a journey into metal. The first thing is external beam put on the same tornado, and then this horizontal tube mounted on wooden shocks, all homemade, except we've got the extrusion tube, of course, put on these wooden beams so you could move it fore and aft. Next slide, please. And there's the aluminium front foil, aluminium alloy curved to the arc of a circle, ogival, by rolling a sheet and then letting in a flat plate at the back. You can see the epoxy paste filling the gaps there. So it was a perfect 7% ogival foil. And until yesterday, I thought it was such a wonderful thing because you had no problem with it. And someone in the room who should be named said it's the worst foil shape that's ever been invented. I won't mention his name, but it was something to do with the Australian moth class in the Mach 2, so you might guess who it was. And next slide, please. And so deployed, just by letting go, we used the trapeze wires to hold it up, and they're tight, wet wires, with, you can hardly see that one, with bottle screws to set it very rigidly. There's the vertical strut, which was 2 shaped aluminium pieces edge on, and there's the vertical foil. Next slide, please. And here's the rear foil, very familiar to this audience, but ahead of its time then. We suddenly realized what a wonderful thing an inverted T-foil was. And we worked with Philip Hansford, who should get the design credit. Mayfly had done it in wood the year before. We got confidence. Here are the fences. You can see the line of epoxy where these two pieces were welded together. And transom hung. There's a steel bar you drop down to connect it. And you could do all this in deep water in rough conditions. So we would go off the beach in Weymouth in 1 foot, 2 foot waves and fight to get these things down. And we'd go off a lee shore, independent of a support boat, never had a support boat, and deploy the foils for speed sailing year after year. Next slide, please. Year after year in the speed week. And just to remind you of the configuration, it looks a bit bohemian now because, of course, we all know this foil, with that far forward to give us a long wheelbase, came back on here, and this foil went back out there. And this is what I call a hybrid. It's not a canard, and it's not an airplane. And I believe the aeroplane people are suspicious about the stability of hybrids. So it was stable, and perhaps it was stable because we had such a strong corrective force whenever a transient would get you, because as soon as the bow started to go down, a whole lot more foil went in. That was the advantage of low aspect ratio. Next slide. And there's just a view to look at the configuration end on to try and make it clear what the foil. I'm more than halfway through my script, so it must be going jolly well. Now, if we had a third slide, please. Next slide. And this is just a reminder of what I have been saying, but it is important, the geometry is important. 45-degree dihedral of an ogival section and a tapering only from the junction downwards. So this section is parallel-sided, that section is tapering, and the symmetrical tip we put on for lots of reasons, and it's so familiar to you. But it doesn't matter whether it was first. We evolved it with confidence. I think it was first. It was symmetrical. It introduced very little drag, but it set the boat in a groove. There were very strong forces. When you're going over 20 knots, this little piece here sets the boat in the groove and reduces the leeway angle, and it increases the aspect ratio of what remains left in the water. And when I first went on a jet liner, like I did yesterday, and saw those tips going up, I thought, gee, I know who did that first. Because, of course, I couldn't believe it the first time. It does a lot of things. It gets rid of the tip vortex. It does a lot of things in the hydrodynamics which are beneficial. It gives you an effective increased wingspan, of course. So that was the evolved foil, made in aluminium alloy and costing us a bob or two, but not that much money, in 1972. And we never thought of a way of improving it, apart from this. And we still have it now. And it's the same. It hasn't deteriorated, it hasn't rotted. We can put the boat out there on the lake and sail it today with the 35-year-old foils. And so to a certain extent, it was a good story of evolution in wood. Now, don't think it was all easy. I want to show you how troublesome the foils were. Here's the next one, please. So here is a typical unstable moment, of which there were many. We broke things all the time. We had the tornado, of course, getting faster because of the Olympics. So the tornado was forever getting improved by the Olympic stimulus. I happened to be on the IYU multi-art committee, and the tornado was chosen and conveniently kept. So after each Olympics, we got hold of leftover bits for almost nothing, often given, because the tornado people were moving on to a faster design. And so that was an unstable moment. The next one, please. And there is another unstable moment. But if you're not quite sure why there was an unstable moment with a lady at the helm, if we have one more picture, please. It was because we were enjoying royal patronage in the UK, and the helmsman was not very experienced, and I was in seventh heaven. And it's not indiscreet to say, she's a very lovely lady, and one-to-one with no one listening, it was exciting. I can only tell you that. We're nearly there. But so what happened was, we're just about at the end of the slides. I'm going to show you the speed sailing graphs. Next one, please. So what happened was we ended up with this platform so stupidly stable, anyone could sail it. It was breathtakingly fast. We didn't worry about the speed track. You simply went out there, got on the poles, and stayed there. Our lowest wind speed was 10 knots. You did have to go single-handed. 10 knots in your face feels like nothing. So you wind up and get through the drag hump, as beautifully described by Martin. You get through drag current, and sheet in, and the apparent wind would go ahead, and as per table, it goes to 22 knots, if you're going 20 knots. We'd sail along at well over twice wind speed, and you couldn't believe it. Speed beat no other boat on the water. Not a fast run, only 20 knots. But it was so exciting, you can hardly imagine it. And because you were using the apparent wind, it was steady wind. There were no gusts. And then you stop and turn around, and you go, oh my God, the wind's gone. Because the wind went from 20 knots to 10 knots in 10 seconds. And you sit there thinking, that's a pity, the wind's gone. And then you sheet on the other tack and build it up again. It was unforgettable, and it was new. Now we're on to the final slide, apart from free sailing. And I only show another stable picture, nothing to do with the publicity for a book which is out of print, though I just happen to have a few copies with me. And there you see how little fuss there is, really. Okay, there's a bit of spray, that's probably from the junction. But I often worry about the huge amounts of spray thrown by foiling boats. And it takes us back to Italy, in Lake Maggiore, where a powered hydrofoil in 1910, steam-driven, went across a lake like this, making no wake at all, with ladder foils. So I'd like to end up appropriately in Italy by pointing out that foils shouldn't make spray or wake. That's what they're there for. They're there to cut the water surface cleanly and do the work underwater where it doesn't make any waves or wake. I've got 2 other slides, but have I got time? Promise?
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute, 30 seconds each. Final penultimate slide. This is 500 meters, the conditions I gave you, and just glance down the dates and the right-hand side. Great big crossbows in the hands of my great friend Tim Coleman, going from 26 to 36, and then this wind surface taking over from 86 to 93, and going up another 6 knots to this ridiculous speed of 45, and then a good friend of mine, Simon McEwen, Yellow Pages, Australian. Is that my time?
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough to say, except that there is a true hydrofoil, and there is our friend Paul Larson making this ridiculous further improvement at the end. So there's not time to show my last slide, which I can keep till tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to James. It's quite difficult to compress 40 years of history in 20 minutes, so thank you all for that.